that. All right, I see people joining. Thank you all very much. I'm going to get started on time because I'm very excited at the discussion we're about to have with the absolutely wonderful Dr. Joan Johnson-Freese. I am recording this session for everyone's knowledge, and I will share this with those who couldn't make it on time. But very warm welcome to all of you. This is the Harvard W3D Feminist Fireside Chat that I have the absolute honor of hosting. I am Natasha Garcha. I chair the Singapore chapter, and I'm also a senior director at the Impact Investment Exchange based here in Singapore, focused very much on gender lens investing. The topic for today is the Women, Peace and Security Edge. And before we launch into that, W3D, as many of you know, and I know some Harvard alums are also joining in, really works to connect and empower global leaders who are working together towards sustainable peace. We have 4,000 plus members in an incredible lineup of events every year. Our W3D online publication, Trio, and a global to local approach where we have 21 chapters across all regions in the world. In fact, that's why I see many of you dialing in everywhere from Barbados to Singapore. And so there are many ways to get in touch. I'll send a note to everyone who signed up afterwards to get involved more with W3D. Without further ado, it is my great honor to introduce you to Dr. Joan Johnson-Freese, Professor Emeritus of the National Security Affairs, Naval War College, Senior Fellow of Women and in International Security. And I had the pleasure of taking her class when I was doing my Master's of International Relations at Harvard. I will allow her to introduce herself in just a moment, but I want to call special attention to the fact that she is an incredible author. These are three of the books that I've read and we'll touch on today's discussion. We have Women, Peace and Security, which is the focus of the class that I took. Women versus Women, A Case for Cooperation. I know W3D, we've had so many discussions on the need for us all to be allies, especially in light of the current political climate across the world. And space as a strategic asset. This is when I actually first heard of Dr. Joan Johnson-Freese. I'm a complete space geek, and you will be blown away at the way that space has been positioned in this book as a strategic asset. But let me allow Dr. Joan Johnson-Freese to say a few words to introduce herself, and then we'll get started.
Thank you, Natasha. It's a pleasure to be with everyone this evening, this morning, this afternoon, wherever you are. Thank you for the introduction. Yeah, I spent most of the arc of my educational career, my professional career, as a specialist in space security. I wrote many books on the subject. I testified before Congress, and a colleague of mine asked me if I wanted to join her at a Women, Peace and Security conference, and I very arrogantly thought, I'm a woman, I've been doing this for years, what could I learn? And I said, sorry, I'm busy. And the next year she asked me again, and kind of out of professional courtesy, I said yes, and I went, and it changed my life. It changed my professional life. It changed my personal life in that it connected the dots of a lot of things I was doing. And a lot of the students in the class used to say that too. It kind of connects the dots of your personal, professional life as a woman working in fields like development, diplomacy. So I started getting involved, started teaching the class at Harvard, found that there was no introductory text. So I wrote it, and there's the picture of it there. By the way, it's now in the second edition. And one of the things that I found after reading the book was I was very concerned at how much competition I found among women. So I wrote the book, Women versus Women, The Case for Cooperation. Then the second edition of the textbook came out, and I will tell you right off the bat, Women, Peace and Security has a branding problem. People have a misunderstanding of what it is. And consequently, it's very difficult to get men involved. So I have a new book coming out in spring called Leadership in War and Peace, Masculine and Feminine. And it's kind of the back door of a way to get this information to a broader audience, because I do believe again, is I hope we will, I'm sure we're going to get into, it's not a matter of interest to women. Women, peace, and security is about men, women, boys, and girls and the relationship to national security.
Absolutely. And we're definitely going to dive into that aspect of it. So thank you all very much for being with us. We're going to launch right into the discussion. And let me start by talking about really one of the things that inspired me after taking the absolutely fabulous class that Dr. Johnson-Freese teaches. My whole thesis after that at Harvard was focused on the Athenian edge. So those of you who are familiar with Greek mythology, there are two gods of war. There's Athena and there's Ares. And they both are the gods of war. However, they have very different styles to victory. While Ares, for the myth, focuses very much on victory through bloodshed and warfare. Athena focuses very much on using wisdom. She's also the goddess of wisdom as a very strategic way of winning and navigating war and conflict and also building peace. And I think that was really fascinating for me because disproportionately, you hear about how women are not the main combatants of war, but they're the main victims. But the big takeaway for me after Dr. Johnson-Freese's class was because of being on the front lines, women have these incredibly unique lived experiences, pieces of wisdom and knowledge that allows them to be incredible peace builders, to be incredible security assets. And I think one of the statistics that's really stood out for me is when women are included in the peace process, there's a 35% increase in the probability of an agreement lasting at least 15 years. We are at a time in the world where this makes a very compelling case to have gender equality at these tables, whether you're talking about traditional peace and security, climate peace and security, or even space as a security asset. So we're going to dive really into that. But thank you. This is my way of saying thank you very much to Dr. Johnson-Freese for really inspiring not just my Harvard thesis, but a lot of what my career has focused on since then. And with that, I want to start off by saying, Dr. Freese, Johnson-Freese, the WPeace and Women, Peace and Security course that you teach at Harvard, as I just mentioned, was a huge eye-opener for me and many of us who are working in the field of defense, diplomacy, and development. The W3D network is very representative of this. What I think made the course so informative is what it didn't really just focus on gender equality as a social justice issue. It explored gender equality or the lack thereof in relation to national security, which a very empirical and data-based perspective is what you really brought to the class. And one of the key takeaways for me was all this longitudinal data that shows that the more gender unequal a country is, the more likely it is to be politically unstable and the less likely it is to embrace positive peace. So what do you think, why do you think gender equality brings this edge to the geopolitical arena to enhance stability and sustain peace?
This is not going to be a shock to anybody, I'm sure, but men and women are different. They lead very different lives. They have very different experiences. And individuals who are doing planning, prevention, and mitigation of security challenges, doing that without including half the population, are doing it with one eye closed. It is remarkable how much information you lose by not talking to women. There are two parts to conflicts. There's the conflict itself, and then there's the underlying security issues. And men, when they go into peace talks, deal primarily with the conflict, stop the bullets flying, and who gets what, in terms of divvying up power. What women bring to the table is a requirement to deal with the underlying security issues. The security issues like food security, like have you cleared the mines from the fields where women walk every day to get water? Have you dealt with the inequalities that are keeping our society as a whole down? And I think, again, I like to tell the story. I had a man in the class, a major in the Army, and he's an intelligence analyst. And at the end of the class, he said, I asked if anybody had any thoughts, and he said, I do. I'm really angry. And at me, and he said, no, I'm angry that no one has pointed this out to me before, because I feel like the analyses that I've been doing have been incomplete. And I've not been providing the kind of analysis that gives a whole picture of the security environment to the people responsible for mitigating challenges. And again, that starts very on with having women in planning sessions, in analysis sessions, not just mitigation.
Absolutely. And I think that's a great segue to the next point that we wanted to discuss. So I know this is a feminist fireside chat, but I think it's really important for our participants here to put into context that when we are talking about gender equality, it's not about assuming we're all the same, exactly as you said, but recognizing that we are different. And it's perhaps these differences that really complement each other and bring gender value into politics and peace and security. So I'd love for you to talk more about this evolved definition of gender equality and maybe share an example of how you've seen it in practice. I think particularly, and now I'm very excited for Leadership in War and Peace, the masculine and feminine perspective. So maybe you can touch a little bit on that upcoming book as well.
Yeah, in the 1970s, with the kind of feminist movement, there was a definition of gender equality that says we're all the same. We're all the same. Well, we're not all the same. Sadly, many organizations, and I would include in that most militaries, have adopted that we're all the same and have stuck with it. The more evolved definition is sometimes called gender value, the recognition that men and women are different and bring different things to security challenges. We know, for example, that the human stress response for men is fight and flight. For women, it's called tend and befriend. And it's not that one is better or one are worse. It's some are more appropriate for one situation than the other. And understanding that there are these choices opens the options to policymakers and decision makers. Where have I seen that in practice? For years, the United States tried to negotiate an agreement with Iran with regard to their nuclear capabilities. It never worked. Every time we tried, previous to the Obama administration, it was a pure hammer. And it probably wasn't a coincidence that it was women from the United States and from Europe who were among the key negotiators that finally led to a settlement, an agreement, a negotiated agreement with Iran, which the Trump administration then abandoned. But it was successful because they used a combination of fight and flight, not being afraid to use a hammer when a hammer was appropriate, but also tend and befriend. Work with them, try to collaborate, try to find where they could give and where they couldn't. So I think there are many examples of when this recognition, interestingly enough, going back to the idea that there's a branding problem with women, peace, and security. In some countries that I go to, I can't even say gender equality because culturally that will just shut down the discussion. So I've learned to say things like gender utilization. And just try and get the point across that if you include women, it will be to your benefit. So gender utilization, in some countries, I say gender optimization. If they have women integrated, they're numerically there, but they don't necessarily have a voice at the table to talk about, now you need to move forward with that. So I think if we think about gender equality as, it's not a pie that is limited pieces. It's just adding to it, making it bigger by adding these views of men and women and understanding that there's value to each.
No, absolutely. And I think the other way to think about the pie is to think in an intersectional way. And I think this is one of the other big things I took away from your classes. We really can't talk about security or peace without talking about intersectionality. So while mainstream feminism, and again, I agree with you, there's issues with even the word feminism can be very isolating, has traditionally or primarily focused on gender and sex, but intersectional feminism and an intersectional approach to perhaps peace and security would help us understand that oppression is really an interlocked system. And I'd love to get your views on how can the women, peace, and security agenda better address these challenges faced by marginalized groups, whether that's Indigenous women, LGBTQI+, women with disabilities who also bring a lot to the table and could make this pie bigger, particularly in a conflict or post-conflict setting.
Um, we're fighting a real battle here with awareness. There are so many people that aren't even aware of what women, peace, and security is. Wherever I go, whether it's in the Pentagon or in Ethiopia or Toledo, Ohio, and I've spoken on women, peace, and security in all of those, regardless of the size of the audience, never more than 10% has even heard of women, peace, and security. Even though it's a law in the United States, implementation is a law and has been since 2017. So our first hurdle is getting over this awareness issue, this getting people to understand there's value to diversity and to having gendered perspectives. The second hurdle is then getting people to recognize that women are not a board with one brain, that there are different types of women. And this is where the intersectionality comes in, that very often I'll have men say, well, what do the women think about this? The women? Which women are you talking about? So it's this getting over the second hurdle of recognition that women face different barriers depending on socioeconomics, race, religion, sexual orientation, etc. Part of that, I think, a big step we could make is getting these marginalized women into early planning sessions. Nobody's going to think about wheelchair accessibility if somebody doesn't bring it up. And nobody's going to think about, again, the other intersectional issues unless somebody is there to bring it up. So I think it is important that you bring in not just women, but you bring in different types of women.
Yeah, absolutely. I very often find myself, I work in the financial industry. You're given that sort of token seat as a woman, but all of us, especially, us who are women of color, we're also so diverse in our own perspectives. And I couldn't possibly agree more that women as a homogeneous group is perhaps doing a disservice to the actual diversity we would bring to the table and sort of that gender optimization you were talking about. And I think maybe that really gets us to also, why empirical studies are showing that these peace agreements and last longer when you have women at the table. I think particularly women from civil societies, if they are participants in the peace process, these peace agreements have a 64% less likelihood chance of failing. And so I do completely agree with you on that point. Unfortunately, the Council of Foreign
Did you
Relations
finish your yoga?
has
Yoga? No? Did you finish your yoga? Yeah.
Hi, folks. Thanks for chiming in, but do keep yourselves on mute. I promise we will take Q&A at the end. I think one of the things that we've noticed is that the Council of Foreign Relations did a study and between 1992 and 2019, women were on average 13% of peace negotiators and 6% of mediators and 6% of signatories to the major peace processes across the world. So despite knowing all this incredible data of the sort of value we get of gender optimization, women are still not at the table. So I'd love to get your views on how do we get women to the table, particularly for all of us who are working in these very patriarchal, these fields of defense, diplomacy, and development, which are very much rooted in patriarchal power structures.
Yeah, that's the challenge, isn't it? I don't know if you remember, but we talked about in class blind fish. Remember blind fish? Blind fish, where two fish are swimming in a goldfish bowl, and one fish says to the other, "How do you like the water?" And the other fish says, "What's water?" Very often, individuals are blind to their environment. They simply, if bias and prejudice is not happening to them, they don't see it. And I've had relatively good success with that group using data. When I give a presentations, and I give a lot of them, I have two slides that give a lot of data. One is about the track record with negotiations, and one is about the correlation between gender inequality and security issues. And I give those slides, and on many occasions, I have had men come up to me afterwards and say, "You had me at those slides." So data, data, data. And I think one of the reasons that Valerie Hudson and Mary Caprioli and other researchers have done so much of this data-driven research is because we all get tired of giving presentations and having people say, "Well, Joan, that's just your opinion." No, it's not my opinion. It is empirically backed. So I think there's that group. There's the blind fish group. Unfortunately, there's another group that you can show them data, you can give them the empirical result, and they don't care because they will put power and prejudice over results. And I think that's where we just get into the there's where individuals who think there is a limited amount of, there's a power pie, and that letting women at the table and giving them a voice is somehow going to take from their power, and they feel threatened. And I think, unfortunately, that's on the rise today. It's very much on the rise, where advances that we've made in gender equality, even in places like the United States, we don't know that they're not going to be rolled back. So I think getting people to the table is going to be even harder than it perhaps was in the past.
No, absolutely. And I think, just talking about getting people to the table being harder, it's not just the peace tables that we're excluded from, unfortunately. We're just coming out of COP29, and here's a rather depressing photograph from there. It's blurry, but it's the best shot I could find. And this is the world stage of leaders who were in attendance. Only 8 out of 78 were women. And this was obviously devastating because climate change is one of the greatest threat multipliers to war and conflict. So at a time like this, where we're battling these two crises, which are influencing each other, and we know that women are a solution to both, to have them not at the table, I think is particularly concerning. But I think one of the things that I do want to touch on, one of the pieces of hope that I took away from your class, and I used to, for those of you who didn't catch the beginning, I used to wake up at 3 a.m. every night for 3 months to take Professor Johnson-Freese's class, is because it gave me a lot of hope. There's so much also data, as we just talked about, that shows that once you have more women participating, not just in peace, but also in climate security, is that governments and corporates and even supply chains are more likely to shift towards green practices. And that could have a huge implication on the world that we live in today. So I'd love to hear from you how we can shift this narrative of women being victims of climate security to recognizing their solutions to green and sustainable peace. I think this is very much in line with the discussions we've had so far, is how do you put into context the benefits of getting women to these places, and would that influence how many women we see perhaps at the next COP?
Yes, as you very rightly said, climate change is a threat multiplier in that it doesn't create new problems per se for women. It exacerbates all the ones that are already there. It makes food security even more acute. It makes all of the issues that go along with resources more acute. So it is a threat multiplier. unfortunately as well, it's in some of the in the climate area, we've seen some of the most outrageous examples of it being treated as an issue for women from the north rather than the south, where it's being actually the threat multiplier is even higher. In cases like this, unfortunately, I think we have to resort to showing individuals, skeptics, what's in it for them. That women, as you said, treating them as victims doesn't do anything to solve the problem. But recognizing that women have answers. Women are the largest group, make up the majority of agricultural workers in 60% of the countries of the world. They know better than others how to increase crop yields. The Food and Agriculture Organization in Rome some years back did a study, and they found that if we just took the amount of food aid that is regularly distributed, not looking for more money, just take the aid regularly given, and it is given usually to land owners, usually men, who unfortunately don't always put that aid into the crops, but they will sell it on the black market or whatever. If you gave the aid to the women working the fields, we could increase crop production to the extent that we would have 150 million less hungry people in the world. There's an example from, as I recall, it was from Sudan, where the warlords were arguing about who got a river. And a woman in the room pouring water said it might help you to know that river dried up a couple of years ago. Women know things. And if we're trying to solve issues created by climate change, we need all the knowledge we can get of the environment that is being affected. And we don't get that. When, again, it's not just getting women to the table, it's getting women a voice at the table so that their input is heard and appreciated and considered. Once there, I think it is very often the case that their input, their very valuable input, becomes appreciated, and suddenly there's more acceptance. But as you said earlier, very often women are put in competition with each other for that one seat. We'll give women one seat. We have to move beyond that. That's going to be the point where we could really see some headway made. We know that it's only when women are 30% of a conversation, 25 to 30%, that they feel able to voice their opinions without fear of retribution if those opinions don't fit into the groupthink that's being presented. So we need to get enough people at the table, and ideally intersectionality, so that their voices are heard, the benefits are obtained, and they will be allowed. I hate that word, but allowed more and more input.
No, I know, and I think that the river example I still remember from class, because when you said, I was like, that's an absolutely incredible way to think about how women, I think I was just at a conference the other day with water.org, and they told me a fascinating stat of how 200 million hours per year are spent by women collecting water. And I think this is so such a wonderful example of how, because of her lived experience, she was able to perhaps quell some of the Sudanese warlord approaches to being at that peace table. And I think that's a very powerful way to think about giving women a voice. In fact, that's also a segue to Valentina Tereshkova, who was the first woman known to be in space, who said a bird cannot fly with one wing only. A human spaceflight cannot develop any further without the active participation of women. And I think I want to pick up on that word that you said is it's not just giving them a seat at the table, it's giving them a voice at the table. And one of the most important tables that we have in the world right now is that is space. I think so much billions of dollars are being poured into space exploration, perhaps even more than fighting climate change, which is, controversial, but it is what it is. And I think one of the things that your book on space as a strategic asset talks about is enhancing US space security through cooperation rather than competition. And I see a common thread between your arguments across books in this respect. So as the space race evolves into this sort of very critical aspect of global security, how do you think women can be positioned as assets, really shaping space policy, strategy, and particularly in preventing militarization and fostering more of this spirit of international cooperation?
Yeah, well, space is militarized. Space has been militarized for a long time. The Rubicon that we've been straddling now for some years is weaponization, the weaponization of space. And that's important because no one wins a space war. No one. Everybody loses. So what you don't want is a space war. When the creation of Space Force was announced in the United States, I was not supportive. I had written about it for a couple of years. I didn't feel we needed another bureaucracy. I used the example of the creation of Homeland Security, Department of Homeland Security, and then it took 10 years to really get it to where it was anything useful. So I was not in favor of another bureaucracy, but it was created. And I have to say, I don't want to say I was wrong, but I will say the way it was done has been very optimistic in my view. Space Force is kind of to the Air Force as the Marines are to the Navy. So they have to operate within the confines of Air Force regulations. But that said, Space Force has done everything they can to instill gender equality into their ethos. It is the only military service where the Space Force uniform was first designed for a woman and adapted for men rather than the traditional vice versa. Is that a big deal? Yeah, it is. It is. It's breaking tradition. Women were integral to the stand-up and made sure that gender equality was achieved whenever possible. The regulations that they have for work-life balance are deliberately focused on allowing individuals, men and women, but of course it affects women more, to stay into military service and still be able to have families. So there's that. That's a big deal. The other thing is because of that, because of the diversity that is woven through their ethos and their operating, I think you will find more than the fight or flight. You will find more of the tend and befriend. So I think you'll find ways to cooperate. Even the name, they are the Space Guardians. It sounds a little TV-ish to me, but it's not aggressive. It's not the Space Warriors. Guardian is defensive rather than offensive. And words can mean things. Words can convey an intention. And I think it's very clearly a reflection of the recognition that nobody wins a space war. All you get out of aggressive rhetoric is threats and unintended negative consequences. So I think to me, I'm getting ahead in my new book that's coming out, I use Space Force as an example of something to watch for how well the gender equality influence plays out into tamping down the threat that could lead to an unwinnable space war.
No, I know, and I remember a lot of these phrases from the class, particularly sovereign masculinity, and making sure that we have this way of bringing balance to the equation by bringing women around the table. So I couldn't agree more. In fact, I think one of the other powerful takeaways I had from the class was the notion of male-bonded groups that are strategically very good at keeping women from uniting and building these alliances. And so your latest book, Women versus Women, really encourages women to get better at this tendon befriend, as you're calling it, and just so that we can collaborate to achieve our goals. And I'd love to, my final question, and this is highly requested by the audience, is what are some of the ways all of our listeners today can embrace this case for cooperation so that we can navigate our careers? Particularly, I think it's very important since we are in a very polarized environment right now.
Yeah. There are three things that researchers have found pretty universally that are important to get men and women recruited, retained, and promoted in positions, in whether it's finance or the State Department or the Defense Department or wherever it happens to be. Recruiting, retention, promotion. And unfortunately, they work entirely different for men and women. You have to, for all of those, you have to be competent. Well, men often mask or supplement their competence with confidence. They are just so aggressive that individuals assume they must be confident. Women have to be competent, but be very careful not to show it. Otherwise, they could be perceived as threatening to the men in the group. Confidence, men have no problem with that. Women sometimes do, quite frankly, and it's because they are so often challenged. Their competence is so often challenged. And the third is mentorship. Men have the advantage of mentorship far more than women. And I felt it myself. I've had other women say it to me, that the gauntlet that they have had to go through professionally has been so exhausting that they just don't feel they have the energy to mentor other women. But we need to, because mentorship tells you the informal rules of an organization that can make the difference between your retention and promotion or not. We need to have mentors. Mentors are not just people who put us up for positions. They're the ones who say, you need to work on your presentation skills. You need to, whatever it happens to be, fill in the blank. So they will tell you what you need to do. So we need to build the support system of mentors. We need to be allies for each other. And that is so hard to do because allyship sometimes, often comes with penalty. If I know when I was a woman department chair at the Naval War College, it was standard operating procedure for when a man got promoted, he would bring along those individuals, those men he felt were competent and he wanted to work with, along with him. As a woman, if I tried to hire or promote other women, it was immediately, well, Joan's playing favorites. So there's punishment for allyship with women. There can be. So, and this is not an original idea to me. It was in Wendy Sherman's book. She talked about subversive sisterhoods, that there are things we can do to help other women. Everybody, I'm sure, in this audience has had the experience of being in a meeting and suggesting something and getting a polite head nod and then going on. The whoever's conducting the meeting goes on, and then a man says it 5 minutes later, and it's an unbelievably sharp idea. So we've all had that. So if you're in a meeting and Natasha, you make an argument and it's overlooked, I just raise my hand and say, excuse me, can we go back to what Natasha said? I'd really like to hear more about that. It's not confrontational. It's not saying, hey, bozo, you overlooked what she said, but just say, can we go back to that? Or when you're interrupted, we all know women are interrupted more than men. When you're interrupted, just, sometimes you just have to wait for the opening and then say, as I was saying, could I go back and finish my thought? There are ways to just help each other. Or again, not even you having to say that, but saying, could we go back to what was being said? It's everything is not confrontational. I've said that so many times. You can't, it's not a matter of chip or chump. You can't have a chip on your shoulder all the time, or nobody wants to work with you, and it's exhausting. And you can't be a chump because you'll get walked on. So it's finding this balance, finding ways to insert yourself in a non-confrontational. I have found one of the best things I have ever found is when somebody says something really stupid, ask them for more information. Give them a lot of rope so they can hang themselves. I had a man in a meeting say something about gender equality in the military was not required. It was just politically necessary. And I said, I would love to hear more about that. Can you go on? And of course, the more he talked, the worse it got and the worse he looked. I was once giving a talk on space and introduced as an alleged expert in my field. And I thought, no, am I going to get up and confront that? And I thought, no, what I'm going to do is I'm going to get up and I'm going to give the best speech on space these people have ever heard and let the audience decide who's the idiot. So it's not very succinct advice, but it's the best I can do.
No, I think that was incredible. And I love I was taking avid notes, as I'm sure everyone else was. I love the example of giving people more rope to hang themselves. I am going to try that later today. I have a list of things I'm gonna put into execution. But I think this is just for everyone. Again, this is actually one of the most incredible books I've read in recent times. It's so practical. It's so rooted in exactly as you're saying. It's not about confronting. It's not about chip or chump. But there are ways we need to navigate this in a smart way. And thank you so much for all these absolutely wonderful insights. With that, I'm going to open it up to the audience for Q&A. I know we have a very vibrant community here, and this was much requested. And I completely agree. I see the chat now, Rashi, subversive sisterhoods. It's such a great term. And hopefully we can all learn from that. So the next time we have a debrief at W3D, let's reflect on this a bit more. Judith, do you want to kick us off? I see you just popped a question in the chat. Feel very free to unmute yourselves and let's make this more of a conversation.
Sure. Wonderful presentation and many things that resonated. I also love the hanging the rope idea. And I also have someone in mind. But back to the question. So I was wondering, the State Department has been doing, I'm now retired about a year and a half ago. And there is a reorganization. And I'm wondering if any of the concepts that you shared with us or strategic ideas of improvement toward gender optimization are being used in that whole of State Department look at self-improvement.
I am far more familiar with DOD than with State Department, so I can't give you a good answer to that question. State, because diplomacy is in their wheelhouse as opposed to military, they have been more proactive about implementation of the Women, Peace, and Security Act, generally speaking. 2 years ago, the Biden administration required a kind of a Women, Peace, and Security implementation assessment. And the 4 organizations in the United States charged with implementation are Defense, State, USAID, and Homeland Security. USAID and State included their budget figures, included what they did. And, if I was a teacher giving them a grade, they'd probably get a B. Not a B plus, but a B. DOD, they'd get a kind of gentleman's C. And the last budget figure they put out was for $8 million, and that was 2 years ago. $8 million out of the defense budget. That's coffee money. And Homeland Security, F. So State is doing better. Homeland Security, it appears they're doing, what's the word? Nothing. And they're assessing. They're very busy holding meetings. And I had a military officer say to me one time, and I think it's true for many security organizations, they are very good at complying. Complying can mean we held a lot of meetings. We didn't actually do anything, but we held a lot of meetings. So I think State is, it's at least on their horizon. Their awareness level is higher than DOD and Homeland Security. But beyond that generality, I don't know.
Thank you very much, Dr. And thank you for the great question as well, and for the incredible response. Feel free to raise your hands, or if you'd like to unmute yourself, that's fine as well. I see we already have a couple of folks unmuting yourselves. Do you want to chime in? Rashi, go ahead.
So I really want to thank you for such an eye-opening conversation that we've had so far. My question is a little bit more general, and I'm wondering if you have any insights into why women don't support women always in the workplace. And I think that's the first part of my question. And the second part is, as we see women get better educated and richer, we're seeing the social landscape kind of shift towards that. How is that reflected in the workplace?
Well, thank you for the questions. These are all great questions, and I love these Q&A sessions. So why don't women cooperate in the workplace? Women from a very early age are taught to compete. And when I wrote the book, I did a large survey of women from 18 to 65, and I asked them what areas they felt they had ever been in competition with another woman. And the number one answer, by far, overwhelmingly, anybody hazard a guess what it was? For men. For sexual relationship attention. We are taught from a very young age that you need to be likable and be pretty so that you will get married, because traditionally the gender stereotypical roles are men are protector providers, women are caregivers, childbearers. And because they were protector providers, women, for survival, had to find a husband, and a good husband. And we see it everywhere. Television, anybody watch the Bridgertons or watch the Gilded Age or watch any of those shows? What is the goal of every woman? A good marriage. So we are taught to compete. And then if you take that, the number two area where women said they had been in competition with other women is in the workplace. And that is because, as Natasha said, it's when the door gets opened, there's usually one chair for a woman. There may be 6 qualified women, but they're going to give one position. And once that one position is filled, that box is checked, and it's not as though there's going to be a strong bench behind her. So women are put into competition with men, but with other women. It's triangulation. You're shooting each other. And until that door is opened and the outcome is of concern, we're going to keep doing that. And what I mean by that, there was some studies done of military leaders in Scandinavia. I guess it was broader, European countries, and in the United States. And in Scandinavia, gender equality was said achieved when equal outcomes were achieved. So when there was 50-50 or 60-40. In the United States, military officers said, when the doors opened, we've done everything we have to do. And that may mean, again, one pilot, one astronaut, one whatever. So we are put in competition. We're taught to compete. We're very good at it. But the flip side of that is there are also many instances where women will work with other women, Liberia, Northern Ireland, etc., in conflicts to keep the family life going. In Northern Ireland, the Catholic and the Protestant women would meet on a regular basis talking about how do we get our kids to school safely? How do we get food? In Liberia, it was Protestant, Catholic, and Muslim women working together to stop the conflict, stop the bullets flying. Women can work together, but in a normal situation, however we define that now, we are taught to compete. Oh, the second part of your question was how will this socioeconomic change affect that? I think in the United States, the next 4 years are going to be very indicative, very, very indicative of whether or not there's going to be rollbacks. There is something called linked fate theory, which I found fascinating when I was doing that book, which basically says minorities will very often work together, including in areas like voting, with the feeling that as their group gets ahead, they personally will get ahead. The only group that was found not true for in the United States was white married women, because they saw their fate more tied to their husband's success than other women. So they were willing to vote against women's rights if it protected and advanced their husband's rights.
Classic case of social dominance orientation. But
Yes,
I'm going to call on Taylor. I saw you had a hand raised. You feel free to unmute yourself and go for it.
Hi, thank you so much, Joan and Natasha. Joan, I'm coming from the education space, and I'm just wondering what you think the role and responsibility is of gender equality in education, and just how your thoughts sort of apply to education in general. I mean, I certainly have my ideas in terms of education being it's very female centered, and that we have a lot of women teachers, except the structure of education is still very masculine. Bells ringing at a certain time, where everything's very structured, desks in rows. I think there's some things that are changing, but I'm just curious to hear your thoughts on that.
A lot of my work in education, and this is a great question, by the way, I spend, when I can't sleep at night, this is what I dwell on. Things aren't going to change until awareness starts at a very young age. And unfortunately, gender is one of those subjects that should not, I don't believe, be taught as a standalone stovepipe. It's more like economics. It threads through a lot of other material. But yet, and Natasha, you can check me on this. Usually when I teach my course on women, peace, and security, I'll ask the class, how many of you have, these are mostly international relations majors, how many of you have ever considered gender in your classes before? And it's usually quite low. Is that right, Natasha?
Absolutely, spot on.
Yeah. It's again, you can get a doctorate in international relations in almost any school in the United States and never talk about gender. And yet we know it is such a prominent factor in so many situations dealing with economics, national security, et cetera. So we need to get gender considerations into curriculum early and often. And that's very hard because as an educator, I'm sure you've come against educators teach what they know. And if they don't know about gender, then they're not going to put it into a classroom. I used to say, if somebody wants me to teach how to fly a helicopter, I'm never going to leave the ground. We're never going to get off the ground. I'm going to teach all kinds of things but we're never going to do anything. So I think until, again, general awareness of the involvement of gender in so many issues becomes one that gets put into core curriculums of high schools and universities, we're going to be doing webinars like this where it's raising awareness one person at a time.
No, absolutely. I think our whole class went on a whole campaign. I think we wrote letters to Harvard on how we have to have gender as a cross-cutting theme across international relations. And we referred a lot to your class, though. Harvard's not the quickest institution to adopt things, but I think it was well received. So hopefully at some point this goes into consideration. But your class did inspire a number of us to write that letter. I want to thank you. I have one last question that came through the chat. I think someone's unable to unmute herself, but it's a good one. So I do want to raise that in the few minutes we have left. Is how do you see women, peace, and security playing out in extreme cases such as Afghanistan, where there's gender apartheid?
Well, it is a great question. It's also a very unsettling and disappointing question. The Women, Peace, and Security Act was in place at the time the United States was negotiating with the Taliban, and we didn't obey our own law. We did not insist that there be women at the negotiating table, which allowed, again, the ignoring of all the women's concerns and the gender apartheid of women since then. It's one of the pillars of Women, Peace, and Security. The pillars are participation, protection. Women can't participate if they don't feel safe coming out of their homes. Prevention, using analysis, analytical tools, and relief and recovery. And I think in some instances for relief and recovery, understanding that we don't have to just rebuild, we rebuild better. So conflict zones do provide opportunity for building better. In Afghanistan right now, sadly, I think we're still at just a triage level. We're just trying to keep things going that we can. But I hope that I'm thinking Syria, quite frankly. I'm thinking Syria and other places where we have the opportunity to not just put old institutions back in place with the same male-dominated rules, but like Space Force, to create something new in a better model.
No, absolutely. And on that very hopeful and positive note, thank you so much, Dr. Johnson-Freese. And we're exactly at time. And as promised, I'd love to invite everyone to, just for a moment, if you could put on your videos, we'd love to get a screenshot that we can share with the wider group, the W3D community, but also with Professor Johnson-Freese.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. I really appreciate having you here and hearing your thoughts.
Absolutely. It's been such an excellent discussion as always. I'll just give folks another 1 second to see if they're comfortable to pop on the screen, and then we'll take the shot. Give me just a moment. All right, here we go.
We're all looking good.
Everyone looks fabulous. Thank you. All right. Oh,
all right.
One drop. Do you want to come back? I'm going to just do it again. Okay, 3, 2, 1. One more. I see Tiang Wang. You came back. I'll give you another spot. All right. Thank you all very much. I'll send this across. Dr. Johnson-Freese, you are incredible as always. I think your insights are fascinating. I think your course is incredible. Anyone who hasn't taken this and is still at Harvard, you absolutely must sign up. This was the best course I've taken in my life. I've done 3 masters, and it is an eye-opener in the fact that it is so forward-looking and so ahead of its time. And if we all applied this in a better way to our careers in defense diplomacy and development, I think we could make a true impact and really stay true to the mission that we have. Thank you all for being with us
Thank
today.
you.
And Dr. Johnson-Freese, you have everyone any closing remarks?
No, just to say, I really appreciate these opportunities to speak and to kind of spread the word. And if I can ever help any of you in any way, Natasha knows how to reach me, and would be happy to hear from you.
Wonderful. We'll keep
Thank you very much.
Thank you all very much. Have a great day.
Thank
Great
you.
evening. I know you're dialing in from many parts of the world. Have a wonderful time ahead and a great holiday season. Thank you.
Thank you so much.